My name is Rachel Donovan, and I was 28 years old, standing at the altar in a dress my grandmother had sewn by hand, when my future mother-in-law walked up the aisle holding a document that changed everything. She handed it to the officiant and said sweetly that she had prepared a little surprise for the couple. The surprise was a prenuptial agreement printed in bold red letters with one line underlined: "Sign now or the wedding is off." She expected humiliation. She expected compliance. What she did not expect was what my fiancé did next. That moment at the altar was not an accident. It was months of planning, of whispered phone calls, of a mother who believed she knew better than her own son. The prenup was designed to do two things: to strip away my dignity in front of everyone I loved, and to prove that her control over his life had not ended just because he was marrying me. But what Kathleen Grayson did not understand was that she had been building toward this collision for years, and she had never once stopped to ask what her son might do when the pressure finally broke. Before I tell you how he answered her, you need to understand how we got to that altar in the first place. I met Daniel Grayson 3 years before that altar, at a fundraiser in Georgetown where neither of us wanted to be. He was standing by the windows trying to look comfortable in a suit that fit too well, and I was pretending to care about a silent auction for a cause I could not remember 5 minutes later. He walked over and said the chandelier above us was worth more than his first car, and I laughed because it was the least pretentious thing anyone had said all night. That was the beginning. The easy part. The part where we were just two people who liked each other before the weight of families got involved. Daniel was a project manager for a construction firm that built commercial properties along the eastern seaboard. Solid work. Good reputation. He was the kind of person who showed up early and stayed late, and never complained about either. His mother Kathleen had raised him alone after his father walked out when Daniel was 7. She had built a real estate consulting business from nothing, turned it into something respectable, and never let anyone forget that she had done it by herself. That was the story she told, the version she polished and repeated until it became the only one anyone was allowed to reference. What she did not mention was that her success had come with a cost. She had developed a habit of treating everyone around her as either useful or expendable. Daniel was useful. He was her achievement, her proof that single mothers could raise successful sons. But usefulness in Kathleen's world came with conditions. She expected access. She expected gratitude. She expected to be the most important woman in his life, and she had never encountered a situation that forced her to question that assumption until I arrived. The first sign came 6 months into our relationship. Daniel mentioned that his mother wanted to meet me properly, not at a casual dinner, but at her home in McLean, Virginia, the kind of invitation that felt like an audition. I agreed because I had no reason not to. I arrived with a bottle of wine I had researched for an hour and a dress that was careful without being forgettable. Kathleen opened the door wearing a cashmere sweater and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Within 15 minutes, she had asked about my job, my family, my education, and my intentions, in that order, each question delivered with the precision of someone taking inventory. I was a paralegal at the time, working for a mid-sized firm that handled commercial litigation. I had student debt, an apartment in Arlington, and a cat named after a Supreme Court justice. None of that impressed her. She asked whether I planned to continue working after marriage, as if the timeline had already been decided without my input. I said I did plan to work, and she smiled in a way that suggested she was adding that fact to a mental column labeled concerns. Daniel did not intervene. That was the pattern I learned slowly and then all at once. He loved his mother. He also feared disappointing her, and those two things had become so tangled over 30 years that he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. When she criticized me in small ways, he stayed quiet. When she questioned our plans, he changed the subject. When I asked him afterward why he had not said anything, he said she did not mean it the way it sounded. He said she was just protective. He said I needed to give her time. I gave her time. I gave her 18 months of time. I attended every holiday dinner where she seated me at the far end of the table. I smiled through every comment about how my career would have to take a backseat once there were children. I listened while she told stories about Daniel's ex-girlfriend, the one who had come from money, the one she still referenced as if I should be taking notes. I did all of it because I believed that love could soften any resistance if you were patient enough. The engagement changed everything. Daniel proposed on a rainy October evening at the same hotel where we had met, and for one perfect week I believed that the hard part was behind us. Then Kathleen called. She wanted to talk about the wedding. She wanted to talk about the guest list. She wanted to talk about the venue, the caterer, the flowers, and the timing, all in the first 10 minutes. She had already contacted 3 venues before we had even announced the date. She said she was just being helpful. She said planning a wedding was overwhelming, and she wanted to ease the burden. The burden she eased was her own anxiety about appearances. Every suggestion she made was designed to impress people I did not know. She wanted the reception at a country club where her business associates entertained clients. She wanted a photographer who had shot 2 senators' weddings. She wanted a seating chart that placed her closest friends at the tables nearest the dance floor. When I tried to push back, she would sigh and say she had been doing this longer than I had, as if marriage were a contract negotiation she had already won. Daniel tried to mediate. He would pull me aside and say we could compromise, that his mother just wanted to feel included, that it would be easier if I let her have a few things. But the few things never stayed few. By the time we were 3 months out, Kathleen had effectively taken over the planning. The invitations went out with a return address that was hers, not ours. The floral arrangements were chosen without my input. The menu was selected based on what she thought would impress her friends, not what Daniel and I actually liked. The breaking point came 6 weeks before the wedding. I found out through a vendor that Kathleen had changed the date of the rehearsal dinner without telling me. She had moved it to a different restaurant, one she preferred, and had already sent out notifications to the wedding party. When I confronted Daniel, he looked exhausted. He said she had done it while he was at work and that he had not known how to stop her. He said it was just a dinner. He said we could still have the wedding we wanted. But I was starting to understand that the wedding we wanted was never going to exist as long as Kathleen held the real power. She controlled the budget because she had offered to pay for half, and that half came with invisible strings. She controlled the guest list because she had connections. She controlled the timeline because she had experience. And she controlled Daniel because she had 30 years of training him to believe that her approval was the price of her love. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel came home looking pale. He said his mother wanted to have a conversation with both of us, just a casual lunch, nothing serious. I knew better. I had learned to read the code of the Grayson family the same way Jillian had learned to read hers. A casual lunch was never casual. A request for a conversation was never a request. We arrived at her house on a Sunday afternoon to find a folder on the coffee table. It was labeled Prenuptial Agreement. Kathleen smiled and said she had taken the liberty of having her attorney draft something, just a formality, just to protect what Daniel had worked for, just to make sure everyone was on the same page. Daniel did not say no. He did not say yes either. He sat there in silence while his mother explained the terms as if I were not in the room. The agreement would waive any claim to assets he had acquired before the marriage or would inherit in the future. It also included a clause about separate property appreciation that was unusually broad, and it required me to cover my own legal fees if I ever challenged the terms. I looked at Daniel and waited for him to say something, anything, that suggested he was on my side. He looked at the floor. I told Kathleen that I would need time to review the document with my own attorney. She said that was fine, but she hoped I understood that the wedding could not move forward until the agreement was signed. Not her words exactly. She used softer ones, like advisable and recommended, but the meaning was unmistakable. She had just made the wedding conditional on my signature. And Daniel, the man I was supposed to marry, had not said a single word to defend me. That week was the longest of my life. I took the agreement to a family law attorney who specialized in prenuptial disputes. She read through it and set it down with a look I will never forget. She said the agreement was aggressively one-sided. She said the separate property clause was written so broadly that it could be interpreted to cover almost anything, including assets I helped maintain or improve during the marriage. She said that under the legal standard for duress, having the wedding held hostage by an unsigned document was exactly the kind of pressure that could make an agreement unenforceable. But she also said that fighting it would take time, money, and emotional energy I did not have 6 days before my wedding. I called Daniel that night and asked him one question. I asked whether he would sign a document that treated him the way this one treated me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said his mother had always been like this. He said she loved him. He said she just wanted to protect him. He said maybe I could just sign it and we could deal with it later. That was the moment I realized that love is not always enough to make someone brave. But I did not walk away. I stayed because I believed in the version of Daniel I had met under the chandelier, the man who made me laugh and showed up early and never complained. I told myself that love meant fighting for someone even when they could not fight for themselves. So I called Kathleen the next morning and said I would sign the prenup on one condition. I wanted it signed at the altar, in front of everyone, so that there would be no question about whether I was being coerced behind closed doors. I thought the public setting would shame her into backing down. I thought Daniel would finally step up. I was wrong about both. Kathleen agreed immediately. She said it was a wonderful idea that transparency was important in a family. She did not sound nervous. She sounded victorious. And that was when I understood that she had already planned this outcome. The public signing was not a concession. It was a performance. She wanted everyone to see me sign away my rights. She wanted the humiliation to be visible. She wanted the memory of that moment to hang over every anniversary, every argument, every decision for the rest of my married life. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the sun. I stood in front of the mirror in my grandmother's dress and tried to recognize the woman looking back at me. My mother had flown in from Arizona the night before. She did not know about the prenup. Neither did my father. I had not told anyone because I was ashamed, not of signing, but of needing to sign. I thought that if I could just get through the ceremony, everything would be fine. I thought love could fix what pressure had broken. The ceremony was set for 3 p.m. at a historic chapel in Old Town Alexandria. The flowers were white and pink, the way Kathleen wanted them. The guest list was 140 people, mostly people Kathleen knew. My family took up 2 rows. The rest of the chapel belonged to her world. I walked down the aisle to a string quartet playing a song I had not chosen. Daniel was waiting at the altar in a charcoal suit. He looked handsome and terrified. And next to him, in the front row, sat Kathleen, wearing a navy dress that matched the color of the folder in her hand. The string quartet reached the end of the processional and the chapel fell into that expectant silence that presses against your chest. I stood at the altar facing Daniel. He was sweating at his temples. His hand trembled when he reached for mine. I squeezed once, hoping he could feel what I could not say, that I was still here, that I was still choosing him, that I needed him to choose me back. The officiant, a family friend of the Graysons named Reverend Mitchell, began the opening remarks. He spoke about love as a covenant, about marriage as a reflection of divine commitment, about the sacredness of the vows we were about to exchange. I watched Kathleen from the corner of my eye. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands clasped over the folder in her lap. She was waiting. Reverend Mitchell asked if anyone present had cause to object to this union, the traditional pause that no one ever takes seriously. I heard a few soft laughs from the guests. Then I heard the rustle of fabric and the click of heels on the hardwood floor. Kathleen stood up. She walked to the front of the altar with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in the mirror. She extended the folder to Reverend Mitchell and said, in a voice that carried to the back of the chapel, that she had something important to add to the ceremony. She said it was a prenuptial agreement that she had drafted to protect her son's future. She said she had asked me to sign it privately, but that I had insisted on doing it publicly, and she was happy to honor my wish. The silence that followed was not the usual wedding silence. It was the kind that shatters something. I heard my mother gasp somewhere behind me. I heard my father say my name under his breath. I heard a camera shudder from the photographer who did not know whether to keep shooting or run for cover. Reverend Mitchell looked at the document, then at me, then at Kathleen. He asked if the agreement had been reviewed by counsel. Kathleen said it had been drafted by her attorney and that I had had the opportunity to review it. She did not mention that I had had exactly 6 days. She did not mention that I had been told the wedding would not proceed without my signature. She let the words hang there, clean and incomplete, and let the guests draw their own conclusions. I looked at Daniel. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. He was staring at the folder as if it were a live animal that had crawled onto the altar uninvited. He did not speak. He did not move. I felt the first real crack in the floor of my composure. I had expected him to say something, to tell his mother to sit down, to take my hand and walk me out of that chapel. He did none of those things. Kathleen turned to the congregation. She explained the terms in a voice that was sweet and practiced. She said the agreement protected assets Daniel had accumulated before the marriage, as well as any future inheritances. She said it was standard for families in their position. She said it was nothing personal. She looked at me when she said that, and we both knew it was a lie. Reverend Mitchell asked me if I was willing to sign. The question landed like a verdict. 140 people were watching me. My mother was crying. My father had his hand over his mouth. Daniel was still frozen. I had two choices: sign the document and spend the rest of my life knowing that my marriage had been purchased with my dignity, or refuse and walk away from the man I loved in front of everyone who mattered to me. I reached for the folder. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I had imagined this moment 100 times in the days leading up to the wedding, and in every version I was shaking. But the body does strange things when it decides to stop fighting. The folder was warm from Kathleen's hands. I opened it and saw the same language my attorney had flagged: the separate property clause, the fee-shifting provision, the signature line at the bottom, waiting for me. I looked at Daniel one more time. This was my last chance. I said his name, quietly, just his name, and something in his face changed. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. His eyes moved from the folder to my face. He blinked. And then he reached over, took the folder from my hands, and closed it. He handed it back to his mother. He said, "No." The word was soft. It was barely audible beyond the first row. Kathleen smiled, the patient smile of a woman who had heard no from her son before and had always waited him out. She said, "Daniel, we talked about this." He said it again, louder this time. "No, not today, not ever." He turned to face the congregation. His voice was shaking, but it was clear. He said, "I love this woman. I asked her to marry me. I did not ask her to sign a contract to prove she deserves me." He looked at his mother. "You raised me to be strong, but being strong doesn't mean letting you control my life. It means standing up to you when you're wrong, and you are wrong." The chapel was silent, not the respectful silence of a ceremony, the stunned silence of 100 people who had just watched a family fracture in real time. Kathleen's face did not crumble, it hardened. She tucked the folder under her arm and said, in a voice that was velvet over stone, that she hoped he would not regret this. She turned and walked back to her seat. She did not sit down. She picked up her purse and walked out of the chapel. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. I looked at Daniel. He was crying, I was crying, my mother was crying. Even Reverend Mitchell looked like he needed a drink. But Daniel took my hands and said, "I'm sorry, I should have done that months ago. I should have done it the first time she made you feel small. I'm sorry it took this." I did not say it was okay, because it was not okay. But I said I loved him. I said we could figure the rest out together. He kissed me. The photographer captured it. The guests erupted in applause. The string quartet started playing again, something light and fast, as if the room needed to exhale. But even as I held him, I knew that was not the end. Kathleen Grayson was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She had lost the battle at the altar, but she still held the financial leverage. She had paid for half the wedding. She had paid for the venue, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer, and she had walked out without saying whether she would cover the rest. The check for the reception was in her name. Reverend Mitchell cleared his throat and asked if we wanted to continue with the vows. Daniel looked at me. I looked at my mother. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I said yes. We said our vows in front of a congregation that had just witnessed a public execution of family control, and we meant every word. We were pronounced husband and wife. We walked down the aisle together, past the empty seat where Kathleen had been, past the guests who were still processing what they had seen, and out into the October sunlight. The reception was scheduled to start in 2 hours at the country club Kathleen had chosen. We drove to the venue in silence. Daniel kept glancing at his phone. Messages were coming in. His mother, his aunt, his cousin, his mother's attorney. He did not open them. I watched the notifications pile up on the screen, each one a small pressure wave from the world she controlled. When we arrived at the country club, the banquet manager met us at the door. She looked uncomfortable. She said there had been a call. The payment for the reception had been canceled. Kathleen Grayson had instructed the venue to close the booking. The staff were still there, the food was prepared, but without payment, they could not serve. Daniel asked how much was owed. The banquet manager told him. It was $15,000, the remaining balance for the hall, the catering, and the open bar. Daniel's face went white. He had $800 in his checking account. I had $2,000 in savings. Our combined assets were not enough to cover a quarter of what we owed. We stood in the lobby of the country club, in our wedding clothes, surrounded by guests who were arriving for a reception that no longer existed. And that was when I understood that the prenup had never been the real weapon. The real weapon was the dependence she had built into every part of our lives. She had not just opposed our marriage, she had financed it. And now she had called in the debt. I looked at the guests filing through the door. My mother, my father, my college roommate, Daniel's friends from work, all of them dressed up and hungry and ready to celebrate. I looked at the banquet manager, who was waiting for an answer. I looked at Daniel, who looked like a man watching his entire future collapse in slow motion. And then I did something I had never done before. I called my mother-in-law. She answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting for it. I told her we were at the country club and that the reception had been canceled. She said she knew. She said she hoped this would teach Daniel a lesson about loyalty. I asked her what she wanted. She said it was simple. She wanted me to sign the prenup. She wanted me to do it today, at the country club, in front of the same guests who had watched her walk out of the church. She said that once the document was signed, she would release the funds and the reception could proceed. She said the choice was mine. I hung up, I looked at Daniel. I told him what she had said. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. He said, "I can't ask you to do this." I said, "You're not asking, she is." And then I made a decision that surprised even me. I told the banquet manager to set up a table in the main hall. I asked her to find a notary. I told Daniel to call his mother and tell her to bring the folder. The reception was going to happen, but it was not going to happen the way Kathleen imagined. I had one card left to play, and it was a card she had never seen coming. The banquet manager set up a small table near the main hall's grand piano. White cloth, a single lamp. A notary sat waiting, pen in hand, looking like she had been pulled out of a Sunday afternoon and dropped into someone else's family drama. I stood beside the table, still wearing my grandmother's dress, and watched the guests begin to understand that something was happening. They had come for champagne and dancing. They were about to witness a negotiation. Daniel came back from the lobby. He said his mother was on her way. She had sounded pleased. She thought she had won. I did not correct him. I just touched my phone in the pocket of my dress, the phone that held a recording I had made 6 days earlier at the casual lunch where Kathleen had explained exactly what would happen if I did not sign. She had used the word advisable. She had also used the word otherwise. I had pressed record before she finished her first sentence. Kathleen arrived 15 minutes later, wearing the same navy dress from the ceremony, the folder tucked under her arm like a trophy. She walked through the crowd of guests as if she owned the room, which technically, until that moment, she did. She stopped at the table, placed the folder down, and said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, that she was glad I had come to my senses. She said it was never about control. It was about prudence. I opened the folder. I took out the document. I looked at the signature line. And then I looked at the guests, at my mother in the back with her hands clasped, at Daniel standing beside me with his jaw set, at Kathleen with her patient, victorious smile. I pulled out my phone. I said, before I sign anything, I think everyone here deserves to hear what was said when this agreement was first presented to me, so they can decide for themselves whether this is about prudence or control. I pressed play. Kathleen's voice came through the speaker, clear and unmistakable. Rachel, I hope you understand that the wedding cannot move forward until the agreement is signed. It would be advisable for you to cooperate. Otherwise, I will have to reconsider my financial involvement. And Daniel trusts my judgment. The room went still. The recording continued. Her voice grew sharper, more honest, the polished veneer cracking as she explained that she had not raised Daniel to let a woman take half of everything. She said I was sweet but replaceable. She said the prenup was the price of entry into her family, and if I did not like it, there were plenty of other women who would sign without hesitation. I stopped the recording. I looked at Kathleen. She was frozen. Her face had gone the color of the white tablecloth. She opened her mouth and closed it. For the first time in the years I had known her, Kathleen Grayson had nothing to say. Daniel broke the silence. His voice was quiet, controlled, and devastating. You told her the wedding would not happen unless she signed. You threatened her. You threatened me. You lied to everyone in this room about what you were doing. Kathleen tried to recover. She said the recording was taken without her knowledge, that it was illegal, that it could not be used. But even as she spoke, the guests were shifting. I saw the looks, the whispered exchanges, the slow realization that the elegant woman in navy had been orchestrating a public humiliation. Then I played the second part of the recording, the part I had saved for last. In it, Kathleen said something she had never said aloud in front of witnesses. She said that if Daniel married me, she would rewrite her will. She would cut him out of every inheritance, every trust, every asset she had ever promised him. She said that blood was thicker than weddings and that she would make sure he understood what loyalty meant. Daniel's face broke, not into anger, into something worse, grief. He looked at his mother and said, "You would disinherit me for loving someone." Kathleen did not answer. She turned and walked toward the exit. The guests parted like water. She did not look back. The door swung shut behind her, and this time no one followed. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then my mother started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Then Daniel's friends from work joined. Then the entire room was applauding. Not for me, not for Daniel, for the truth finally standing in the light. The banquet manager approached me. She said that the payment issue had been resolved. She did not explain how, she just said the reception could proceed. Later, I learned that Daniel's father, the man who had walked out when Daniel was 7, had heard about what happened through a relative. He had called the country club and paid the entire balance. He left no message, no explanation, just money wired from an account in Florida with a note that said, "For my son's wedding, I should have been there." We ate the food Kathleen had chosen. We danced to the music she had not approved. We laughed and cried and stayed until the staff started stacking chairs. And I did not sign a single document that night. But the next morning, a courier arrived at our apartment with a thick envelope from Kathleen's attorney. Inside was a revised prenuptial agreement. This one was fair. This one had been reviewed by an independent mediator. This one did not include the separate property clause or the fee-shifting provision. And attached was a handwritten note from Kathleen, 3 sentences long. "I was wrong. I cannot undo what I did, but I can stop making it worse." Daniel read it twice. He handed it to me. I read it once. I set it on the coffee table between us. That note sat there for 3 weeks before either of us spoke about it again. Because the biggest battle had been fought and won at the altar. But the war for the shape of our marriage, for the trust between us, for the boundaries we would have to build together, that war had only just begun. And the hardest part of this story was still to come. The 3 weeks the note sat on our coffee table were not quiet. They were full of conversations that circled the same wound without ever touching it. Daniel wanted to call his mother. I wanted to throw the note away. We compromised by doing neither. We let the paper sit there like a third person in the room, waiting for us to decide what it meant. During those weeks, I learned something about trust that I had never understood before. Trust is not a light switch. You cannot flip it back on just because someone admits they were wrong. Kathleen's note admitted fault, but it did not erase the memory of her standing at the altar with that folder. It did not erase the recording of her saying I was replaceable. It did not uncancel the reception or undo the look on Daniel's face when he realized his mother would disinherit him for loving me. Daniel started therapy. He went twice a week to a counselor who specialized in family enmeshment. He came home from those sessions looking hollowed out, but also lighter, as if someone had finally given him permission to feel angry at the woman who had raised him. He told me that his mother had always used money as a leash. Every gift came with invisible strings. Every act of generosity was a future debt. He had never seen it because he had never been asked to look. I went with him to 3 sessions. In the third one, the counselor asked me a question I had not expected. She asked whether I could forgive Daniel for not standing up to his mother sooner. I said I already had. She shook her head and said forgiveness is not a one-time event. She said it is something you choose over and over, especially on the days when the memory of the injury is sharper than the love. That hit me harder than I wanted to admit, because there were moments in those 3 weeks when I looked at Daniel and saw the man at the lunch table, silent while his mother laid out her terms. I saw him at the altar, frozen. I saw him in the country club lobby, defeated. And in those moments, I had to actively choose to also see the man who had said no, handed the folder back, and walked me out of the chapel. The 4th week, we made a decision. We would meet Kathleen, not at her house, not at our apartment, at the counselor's office. Neutral ground, with a professional in the room. Kathleen arrived 10 minutes early. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan instead of her usual armor of tailored blazers. She looked smaller than I remembered. She sat in the chair across from us and folded her hands in her lap like a woman, trying to prove she could be still. The counselor opened the conversation by asking Kathleen why she had done what she did. Kathleen took a long breath. She said she was afraid. She said she had spent 30 years building a life for Daniel, and she was terrified that I would take it apart. She said she had been alone since his father left, and the idea of losing her son to another woman felt like a second abandonment. She said it without excuses. She said it without blaming me. She said it the way people talk when they have run out of places to hide. Daniel asked her if she understood what she had almost cost him. She nodded. She said she had replayed the moment at the altar every night since. She said she had watched the wedding video her sister had secretly recorded, and she had seen her own face from the perspective of the guests. She said she did not recognize the woman in that video. The session lasted 2 hours. By the end, we had agreed to 3 things. First, Kathleen would never again use money as a weapon in our relationship. Second, any future gifts would come with no conditions attached, documented in writing. Third, she would continue her own therapy, separately, to address the patterns she had carried since her divorce. We did not become a happy family overnight. We did not become a family at all in the traditional sense, but we became something that might eventually grow into one. Kathleen started sending me texts on Sunday afternoons, just photos of her garden or a recipe she had tried. I responded with short answers at first, then longer ones. Daniel watched both of us with the careful hope of a man who had seen too much to believe in easy endings. 6 months after the wedding, we received an envelope in the mail. It was from Kathleen's attorney. Inside was a document that had been notarized and filed. It was a formal revocation of the original prenuptial agreement, signed by both Kathleen and Daniel. Attached was a letter from Kathleen's therapist, confirming that Kathleen had completed 12 sessions of counseling focused on boundary recognition and coercive control. There was no note this time, just the document, but the document said everything the note could not. I signed the revocation. So did Daniel. We filed it with the court. The prenuptial agreement that had been designed to control our marriage no longer existed. We were starting from zero, with nothing between us except the law that applies to every married couple in the state of Virginia. That night, I asked Daniel if he regretted any of it. He said he regretted not acting sooner. He said he regretted the weeks of silence while his mother assembled her weapon. But he said he did not regret the outcome because the outcome had forced him to choose. And he had chosen me. I asked him if he thought his mother would ever truly change. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that people do not change because they have a moment of clarity. They change because they make a decision every day to be different. He said his mother had made the decision. Whether she kept making it was up to her. 2 years later, Kathleen remarried. A retired history professor named Richard who wore tweed jackets and grew tomatoes in his backyard. She called me before the wedding and asked if I would help her choose a dress. I said yes. I flew to McLean and spent an afternoon in a bridal boutique, watching the woman who had once tried to destroy my marriage try on lace and silk and cry because she had never done this with anyone before. She looked at me in the mirror and said, "I wasted so much time being afraid of losing him that I almost lost him. I almost lost you too." I did not say it was okay, because some things are not okay to say, but I put my hand on her shoulder and said that we were here now. That was enough for that afternoon. The final surprising detail came 3 years after the wedding. Daniel and I were cleaning out the attic of our first house, a small craftsman in Arlington we had bought with the down payment Kathleen sent us as a wedding gift, no strings attached, verified in writing by her attorney. In a box of old tax documents, Daniel found a folder he did not recognize. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a draft of the original prenup, the aggressive one. But in the margins, written in pencil, were notes in Kathleen's handwriting. One note said, "Will she actually sign this?" Another said, "Too harsh, revise." And at the bottom, circled in red, "If she fights, let her go, she is good for him." He had never seen it. I had never seen it. It was a draft she had written before the final version, a draft that showed she had known, even then, that what she was doing was wrong. She had just been too afraid to stop herself. I took a photo of that page. I never showed it to Kathleen. I did not need to. It was proof that even the people who hurt us most are sometimes trying to find their way back to decency, even when they do not know how. Daniel and I are still married. We have a daughter now. Her name is Alina, after my grandmother who sewed my wedding dress. And when she grows up and asks us what love looks like, we will tell her that love is not the absence of conflict. It is the refusal to let conflict define you. It is standing at an altar with someone who failed you and choosing to see the person they are becoming instead of the person they were. That is the story of what happened after the prenup, the part no one saw from the pews. What happened at that altar was not really about a prenuptial agreement. It was about power. It was about who gets to decide what love looks like and who pays the price when that decision is taken away. Kathleen Grayson built her control out of money and fear, and the silent agreement that mothers are allowed to do whatever they want as long as they call it love. But the truth that she learned, and that Daniel learned, and that I learned, is that love that requires your silence is not love at all. It is ownership dressed in family language. There are Kathleens in every family. There are people who believe that their vision of your life is more valid than your own. They use guilt, obligation, and financial leverage to keep you small. They tell you it is for your own good. They tell you they know better. And the hardest lesson of adulthood is learning that you can love someone and still refuse to be controlled by them. You can forgive them and still require change. The prenuptial agreement industry has grown because we live in a world that treats marriage as a financial transaction as much as an emotional one. 15% of marriages now include a prenup. That number will keep rising. But the law also recognizes that agreements signed under duress, agreements presented at the last minute, agreements held hostage by the threat of a canceled wedding, those agreements can be invalidated. Because coercion is not consent, and no signature makes it so. The question that stays with me is not whether Kathleen changed, it is whether any of us changed enough. Daniel learned to speak. I learned to wait without resentment. Kathleen learned that control destroys the very thing it tries to protect. And Alina, our daughter, will grow up in a house where boundaries are not treated as betrayal. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this. You do not have to accept the role other people write for you. Not in your family, not in your marriage, not in the moments when someone hands you a document and tells you that signing it is the only way forward. You can say no, you can walk out, or you can stand your ground and force the truth into the light. That is what I did at that country club table. I did not sign. I played a recording. And the woman who thought she held all the cards discovered that the only card that ever mattered was the one she had never expected me to hold at all. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about boundaries, about the moments when people finally stand up, about the families we choose and the ones we survive, subscribe now. Because there is always another story waiting to be told, and you never know when the next one might be yours.